Hey everyone, we're going to do a little talk here about showing your game early and often. Um, it's a pretty dev focused chat, but even if you're a gamer, there's some stuff about community that would be really interesting to get your feedback on. But yeah, first I'm going to do a little bit of introductions. Um, and also, I think in the chat there's been posted. We've got some slides if you want to follow along. I mean, you're not going to miss anything if you just listen to it, but if you want to sort of join with us, you can follow that link, which should be set up soon. So yeah, introductions. I'm Austin Montville. I'm a developer of a studio in the Seattle area called 2DX. We're working on a game called Sports Ball right now. And a lot of the examples I'm going to talk about and the reasons sort of why this whole thing started up is because a lot of my experiences with sports ball. So yeah, you can check out our stuff at 2dx.com. And Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew Gleeson. I started another small indie company in Seattle about a year and a half ago called Tiny Tempest.
And then Charles, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself and what you're doing?
Yeah, hi. I'm Charles Zapata. I'm founder of Escape Fuel Studios in Seattle. I've been at this for about 4 months, and I'm working on a top-down 2D spaceship RPG, action RPG, tentatively called Star Rangers: Wings of Justice. And so I've been banging at this for about 4 months now. It's early. We haven't shared anything yet too widely, but we're getting some feedback, which we'll talk about in the talk here.
That's the first time I heard the subtitle. I really like it based on what that game is. And TJ Thomas, he won't be joining us today, which is a bit unfortunate, but we still have his info up, which is at Tron Maximum. In case you didn't know, he's sort of the reason why we're giving this talk and why this whole event exists. So you should totally be checking out what he's doing and see any events that he goes to in the area if you're local to Seattle. So yeah. Why should you be showing your games early and often? These games might be unpolished, it might be unplayable, and I want to sort of start this off by a little story, and it's actually the start of my company. 2DX was formed because I showed off a game really early. Basically, about a year and a half ago, I got inspired about this idea for making a game that's as fun to watch as it is to play. I got really excited about the idea, so after work I went home and I started programming that game. I worked on it for a couple hours, and then a few days later I put in the finishing mechanics, so I had a total about 9 hours of work in it. And when I got to that point, I had some friends over at my apartment, so I handed them some game controllers, and they played it for an hour and a half straight. So that's a pretty good ratio of dev time to play time with just this short prototype that was made in less than like a game jam. So I got sort of excited about that, and I was really interested in it. But it really hit off like a month or two later. I was traveling and I was visiting with some friends, and we were at this arcade, and we had sort of run through the arcade. We had played all the games that were interesting there. We were getting a little bored. We wanted something to do. So I had mentioned them, and I had this game I was working on, this like super early prototype. But everyone was also really hungry, so we made a compromise and we head to McDonald's. So all my friends, they grabbed some food. I grabbed my laptop and set it up in McDonald's, handed out some controllers, and the six of us stayed there for 2.5 hours playing that same build. I had never been in a McDonald's for that long before, so having a reason to stay there was because of this game. I thought there was something there, and that's basically what inspired me to start 2DX. I had finally created something that I thought was of value that people would actually be invested in, that have a good timing, and might even pay for. So because I took this 9-hour game and decided to show it off to people, I started my company. And so it's because of things like that that I think showing your game early and often can have huge benefits for you. But that's just sort of like one interesting story. I want to get into some of the details of what happens, and also sort of some of the excuses that I hear when people say like why their games aren't ready yet, why they're not going to show the game off. And I want to sort of debunk all those because it's positive every time you show off your game. You just have to know what to look for. So the first sort of aspect of showing off your game, or the first excuse that I hear, is I don't have anything to show yet. They feel that they're not going to get proper feedback because there's nothing to their game. And that excuse is only true if you physically cannot play your game. If you have a cube moving around on your screen, you can probably get good feedback about it. So as long as the game can actually be playable, you should be showing it to people. The reason why this is so important is because mechanics are at the core of the game. Like moving around a box on a screen is actually pretty essential to your game. You know, even if your game is a visual novel and you're just clicking through instructions, there are things to look for. You just need to understand what state your game is at and what you should be looking for. So for example, if your game is really, really basic, just focus on the feel of the controls. Are the buttons intuitive on the controller? Do players feel like they're moving too fast or too slow? You know, if it's a narrative game, how is the pacing of the conversation? Do people like the way the text is coming up? Is it too long or too short? If your game's really early, can players play it without you describing every mechanic in the game? Do they need extra instructions? How are the visuals? Maybe you're more art focused and you're really just throwing some images on a screen, and there's not a lot of gameplay there, but there's art assets and there's things people you want to ask them about, like, are things clashing? You know, does the art style work together? Basically, like, at any point in your game, there is something to get feedback on. And so you really want to focus on that aspect of it. When you bring your game, like, don't show it as a finished game. Show it as a work in progress. And you should know what it is that you need feedback on based on what is the next sort of phase of development. And so to sort of talk about that a little bit, I want to hand this over to Andrew because he's got some stories specifically related to feedback. Oh. Sorry about that. We got to switch over to this microphone.
Apparently, the microphone doesn't want to work on the other laptop. Oh well. So, as I was saying, I started Tiny Tempest about a year and a half ago, and the initial goal was we wanted to make Austin. Oh, and it went away. Whatever.
We're good. Keep going.
This is an adventure. So I wanted to make a spiritual successor to a game I made in college. And we spent about a year kind of working towards it and making design decisions and kind of pushing things forward. And I was always uncomfortable showing it off to people because I never felt like it was really finished, and I was worried they wouldn't like it. And I mean, that included, like, even like our families and stuff didn't really see it, and we just kind of told them about it. And it sucked because when we finally started looking at it after a year, it wasn't fun. People didn't like it and they were confused by it, and there was just a whole bunch of mechanics that didn't work together that we hadn't found out because we were just throwing crap against the wall. And so I spent about a week throwing together like a really simple build that I could just get people to play and try some new things. And and Austin actually invited me to a LAN event that he was going to, and so I brought my build on my little laptop to this LAN event and had, you know, maybe 5 or 6 people play it, and got immediate feedback for, this is what confuses me, this is what I don't understand, and was able to take that and turn it around and spend a month working on new things that people might go, oh, cool, you know, I can see the score better now, it makes more sense, I can see what's going on and what my next objective is better, it makes more sense, and turn all of that into positive, you know, reinforcement and new ideas that help the game be more fun versus just working in the dark and then finding out that it's not working and it sucks and you have no idea what to do and you're just kind of guessing at that point. So the game we're working on now is kind of close. It's very similar to what we were working on for a year, but with a few like specific changes. Like, we changed the way that scoring works so it's more visually apparent, and we changed the way movement works so that it's easier for players to understand where they can and can't go. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time going into the game we're actually making because that's not the point. If you're interested, you can check out Channel Surfers in its current iteration on our website, tinytempest.net. But I think we've made a lot of kind of interesting design decisions that are no longer just guessing. It's let people play it in some bar, let them tell you what they did or didn't like about it, what they didn't understand, and then go back home and be like, okay, well, they didn't like this, they didn't get this, what can we maybe do that'll be better and that they will get, and you take it back to the same bar or a different bar or wherever, and you let them play it again, and they go, okay, this is better, you know, I remember it last time, it was different, I like this more, I like this less. You just kind of run through this constant loop of communication and feedback, and you always build towards something that gets your point across better and something that more closely resembles what. And I think that's important than sitting down in the closet and making the game that you want to make. Is, you know, not every, like, that doesn't work all the time. And the game that I wanted to make isn't the game that anyone wanted to play. So I found a new game. So that's kind of what we got. Back to Austin now to continue with the rest of his speech.
All right, so thanks for that little bit, Andrew. And yeah, I mean, I've been seeing the game progress, and the amount of improvements that were made based off of all the development time before and that one event that they showed it at was pretty phenomenal. So this actually leads into the next sort of section, which is prioritizing. And another excuse that I'll hear as to why people don't show off their games at events is that, like, oh, I need to finish this feature first, or like, it's not good until I add in this one aspect of the game. They feel like the game's never quite ready to show off. And the thing is, the thing that you think is really important about their game, it might not be the most important thing about your game right now. There's, you know, if you spend all this time working on these features and you sort of build yourself in a hole, and then you go off and show your game at some event and no one notices this thing that you poured hours into, but everyone's having fun with this one other element that you just sort of, you know, pushed in there quickly, there might actually be a better game to discover. And so actually Charles has a really great story about that, so I'm going to hand it over to him and let him sort of talk about his experience with finding the better game.
Cool. Thanks, Austin. So actually, I have two related stories on that note. So just to provide some context, I wanted to build this game for many years. I really was a big fan of top-down 2D spaceship shooters, and I could never find one that I wanted to play. You know, and I looked, and so this was really me making the game that I wanted to play, which, you know, some would say that's crazy, some would say it's passionate, but I said, you know what, I've got an opportunity, I'm going to go make the game that I want to play. And so I wanted to really unify RPG, decision-making story with top-down 2D spaceship combat and exploration. So I set out, I left my job at Amazon, and I spent about 2.5 months coding away on various different things. I spent some time working on the combat, and I thought I got that to a pretty good spot. And I spent a fair amount of time on the RPG side, incorporating dialogue engines and getting the UI just right for conversations. Now, I'm not a writer, and so you know, I put in some placeholder content, but you know, I wasn't really looking for feedback on that. You know, you need to be gracious with all feedback, but it wasn't something that I thought was very good in the beginning, so it wasn't something that I was very interested in. But I wanted something that allowed players to exercise the RPG UI, basically, you know, the buttons, the displays, and things like that. So I showed the build to a few people, and the feedback was quite immediate, which was, what is all this story stuff in the way? This is boring, this is slow, I want to get to the spaceships already. And that's totally, you know, was totally eye-opening, but totally valid, right? And so I said to myself, okay, I need to get to the core game loop here. And the core game loop is, you know, it's the classic time-honored tradition of flying a spaceship around and blowing stuff up and collecting power-ups and getting bigger and better weapons. And I had focused so much on the RPG side and the mechanics of it without giving enough weight to the combat side that you know, it was clear I had to reprioritize. An additional thing that I didn't that I overinvested in, to Austin's point earlier, was I had spent a fair amount of time giving the players a lot of information on screen, giving them a lot of options to tune the screen, so that they could filter the UI exactly the way they wanted it. Do you want the heads-up display to show this? Do you want to be at this zoom level? Things like that. And when I showed it to people, they were just overwhelmed. And it was clear to me, okay, I am giving the players too much to think about. There was too much mental load for them to get started on the game. Right, and that's something you can, as you know, when you're building a game, you kind of train yourself out of, or rather, you don't notice it happening because you're making the game. Stuff you take for granted. Oh, of course I know I press Q, I press V, and then I press plus 2 times, and then this happens. Like, that's not obvious because other players aren't doing that 20 hours a day. And so it became obvious, okay, I need to refocus the game on the part that the core game loop that people want to experience. Not that I'm going to give up on the RPG side, but really get that game experience going. So in the second build, or the second event, which I displayed it at, which was at an indie meetup in Seattle, I had pared away almost all the RPG stuff, left it right down to the combat mechanics, and let people just jump in and start playing right away. Now, this was successful in that people were able to sit down and start playing the game. But what was interesting was it showed me very quickly that some of the decisions that I had made in terms of control structures and control inputs were way off. Things that I took for granted, like I had the mouse button on the right. The left mouse button was the thrust on the ship. This is a very specific example. And I took this for granted. This is not a big deal. Uniformly, everyone thought, oh no, this is wrong. Right? There's no rule in the universe about, how controls are supposed to be laid out, but apparently no, actually there is, and people's intuitions are very, clear on that. And so then I realized, okay, what I need to do is accommodate players' need for control. And so what I've done is I've refocused the last couple weeks of effort on, okay, making sure that the control scheme is something that someone can sit down and play right away. Don't have to think too hard about it. And yet also, and this was another part of the feedback, allow players to set up their own control systems. Things like, for example, UI menus. This is actually kind of Austin's point about a feature that you maybe knocked out really quickly and had big value. I thought, well, you know what? I'll just defer having user-controlled settings because people don't really care about that. They can learn whatever control system I put out there. Not true. Almost every person who sat down said, oh, I want to set the numbers myself. I want to set the keys myself. And I was like, oh my gosh, I better put that in. So I'm working on that right now to make sure that's in place so that anyone can sit down. If they like the defaults, great. If not, they can go set it to themselves so they can start playing. And so getting that game out in front of people, having them give me that feedback, and then also seeing that the feedback was getting more useful. Right, the first set of feedback was you're working on the wrong thing. Then the next set of feedback was, you're doing the right thing the wrong way. Now I think I'm, fingers crossed, I'm trying to get a build ready for IndiCade, and so the feedback I'm hoping there is, this is generally the right thing in the right way. It's not done yet, but you're on the right track there. So that's my experience with that.
Hey, thanks for those details, Charles. And yeah, I mean, I've been seeing the development of the game, and it's the feedback is sort of immediate. Like you can change direction very quickly, which is really helpful on a game, because games take a really long time, and you want to make sure that you're not putting in all this effort into something that players aren't going to notice, or that players aren't going to want, or that you're just going to end up cutting later. So being able to show your games off allow you to be your production timeline to be a lot more agile, and you can focus on making. You're not compromising your design. You're just figuring out what things you need to focus on, especially to get people excited about the game. One thing I do want to mention is that we're getting some comments and questions in the chat. This is awesome. Keep them coming. We're going to finish up this talk by sort of going over all the major points, and then we're going to have a bunch of time later for Q&A and just sort of general discussion about this topic. So please keep those down. We're already writing some responses to them, and we'll deal with all that individually. We'll actually have a cool conversation about this. But moving along, the next thing that the reason why these showings can help your game out is by setting deadlines. And another excuse I hear is that, like, I'm too busy to go to this event. Like, I've got so much work that I have to do. Like, I can't be showing off the game. And really, events can help you prioritize your work in that you're setting these deadlines that will really help you focus. For example, like, I can set myself up for, okay, for this week, these are the features I'm going to get done. I'm going to implement, this aspect. I'm going to get these art assets done. But at the end of the week, if, especially if I'm an independent and I'm the only one who's keeping track of that, if I let it slide or I let it slip, or there was something else that I went to and I didn't invest as much work, or I sort of worked slowly that week, I'll probably let those milestones slip, and I'll try to catch up later, or just reprioritize the scope of the game. Whereas if I have an event where I say I'm going to get some features done, especially if it's an event that I've been to before and players are going to expect a better version of the game, I'm going to get that stuff done. I'm not going to let myself slide. So deadlines really set up this situation where you're forcing yourself to actually achieve set goals, because there's a consequence if you don't. And that's really helpful in motivating yourself. There's also other great benefits about events, is that it helps you maintain a playable build. You know, if you are showing off your game and if you're showing it off frequently, I really suggest like every week if you can manage it, then your game is always playable, which is pretty important, because if you're not playing your game frequently, it's going to be noticed. Additionally, every event that you go to is a backup version of your game. So when you go to a really important, you know, convention, like say you're hitting like a huge thing like RTX or PAX or something like that, you know, there's going to be a ton of people who are going to play your game, and that is absolutely the time where your build is not going to work. So having an entire history of builds that did work at previous events is really helpful, because when that game crashes the latest build, you just load up the previous one. There's not that much missing, and you can fix up the things after the day of the event, you know, that night. So it helps just take down those terror situations, or at least, you know, allows you to circumvent them. And really just, I want to sort of emphasize this point of that you need to be playing your own game. When you go to events, like play your game with other people. You can tell when someone's not playing their game. It's really noticeable, and it's actually probably one of the most impactful things in your progress. So often it's easy to just get into like building tasks, and I have to finish this thing and I got to work more, and you never take time to actually just sit and play your game. Whereas at an event, you can't work on it, so you have to play it, and it's really healthy for your game. The next sort of bit that I want to talk about is marketing. Another excuse I hear is that, you know, I don't want to be judged on the game's current quality. Like if I show the game now, everyone's going to know that this is how the game looks, and it's going to get like bad press ratings, and they're like, oh, the game looks terrible and it doesn't play right. You absolutely do not need to worry about that. Marketing is a huge aspect of the game. It's as important of development as art assets or design or programming, and so it takes a lot of effort to get people to know about your game. Like, there are games that hit the front page of, you know, Rock, Paper, Shotgun and Kotaku and Polygon, and people still don't know about those games. So the fact that you're bringing your game to a small local gathering of, you know, 40, 50, 100, maybe even 200 people, it's not going to, you know, break out in the internet as this is the game. So you don't have to worry about this being the big reveal of your game. It won't. That'll be something that you plan, that you do very specifically, and you don't do it until you're ready. Hell, you probably don't do it till the game's already done. So don't worry about that aspect. Like, this is just to get feedback on your game. Like, it's going to be a work in development. But there's actually a really great benefit to this, in that, you know, marketing needs to start long before you're ready to actually be showing the game. You know, you need to build up a community. You need to get people interested in it. And so these local scenes where you can start building up fans that can, you know, you build up this fan base of people to like follow you and tweet about you and have this long trail, that's a really effective way of actually marketing your game. You can't just expect to have this one big push and then everyone knows about the game. Just like you can't expect to just make a game quickly. It's something that takes a long time, a lot of iteration. And some things that you can really iterate, especially when you're at an event, is, you know, you can talk about your pitch. When you have to show your game off to 100 people, you get very good at pitching your game in one sentence really quickly, because you don't want to have to explain the entire game every time another person picks up a controller. And because of that, you're able to really refine that pitch of like what is the one sentence description of your game. For example, like, for a long time, we didn't really know how to explain sports ball. There's a lot of things going on there. It's a hectic multiplayer game. But eventually, after talking about it more and more and like realizing what the game is, we cut it down to sports ball is a game about soccer, jousting, and flying birds. That's all I need to say to get someone interested, and probably hand them a controller so they'll want to play. I can go into more details about what the game is, but that's all we really need. And we were only able to refine that pitch after a 2-day event of showing it to tons and tons of people. Going to events is going to help you refine that. And finally, these events can really help you find your target audience, especially if you don't know what it is. You'll notice the types of people that are coming to your game, the types of people that are playing your game. And you can pay attention to that at an early stage, so you know who is the most interested in your game. And conversely, you can also find out who isn't interested in your game and why aren't they interested in your game. This will help you focus what it is that you're going to do for your marketing when you actually do a big push. It can also help you refine your game if you're trying to make it more accessible, and find out reasons as to why certain groups of people aren't into it. And the final sort of bit that I want to talk about is developing a community. And this is actually, I feel this is like the real excuse as to why no one wants to show their game early. And they're afraid that no one's going to like it. Especially if you've been working on this for a while, like you've poured like a month or so into it, no one's really seen it. You've got this grand vision for a game and like you're really excited about what it is, but your game is not that right now. And you're afraid that when you show it, someone's going to tell you it sucks, and then you're just going to lose all motivation because you're like, why am I making this game? Why am I investing all this time into it? Like, don't worry about that. In fact, it's really important to get that feedback now because it would suck for you to work on a game for a year and then find out that it's not great.
I don't know what you're talking about.
as we just heard earlier. So by showing it often early, you're going to get actual feedback from your game. When you're developing your game, it's very easy to both, drink the Kool-Aid of your own game. Everyone's on the teams are really excited and they think the game's really great when really it's missing core aspects and people don't understand it. When you show your game off to players, they're going to let you know whether they like it or not. You're going to see it in their face. You're going to see it by how long they play, by how engaged they are about asking you questions about it. Just the way they're holding controllers, the way they're telling their friends about the game. Conversely, this can also really help in a really negative time development, especially if you're pushing really hard, you've been crunching, you've been working a lot on this game. When you show off the game and you see some kid's eyes light up because of the great experience you're giving that person, like, that's going to be super motivating. After you see that, you're going to be ready to go back, to the office and start working on, the next cool feature of the game to make it even better than it already was. And additionally, going to these events gets you involved in the local community. You're going to be hanging out with your coworkers there if you have a team. You're going to be meeting actual fans. You'll be making new friends of, the people who run the events or just other gamers in the area. You'll meet up with other developers. Like everyone on this chat right now, I know because of events that I've been going to for the past few months. Yeah, or years. And so what's been really great is that meeting these people has created amazing opportunities for me. Like, for example, I'm talking to all of you right now. If I hadn't been showing off things at events, I wouldn't have known about IndiE3, and I wouldn't have been able to get involved with this. I have met people who have actually done small coverage on our game. I've made new friends with press contacts. Some of my friends who go to these events, they've been hiring people, other devs in the area, and it's mutually beneficial. The other devs, they get work, and the game becomes better because they find someone that's really talented to work with. You're not going to be able to have these opportunities if you're not going out and making them. They only appear because everyone's congregating together. They don't just sort of like fall into your lap. And a couple other reasons, why it's good to show off is that, you get to actually go out and travel, even if it's just, a few blocks down the road to a local game store, or if you even get to travel to another state or another country to show off your game, that's good, that's healthy. You meet other devs, you meet other people and players with different views and experiences, and it really fleshes out your games. If you do have trouble with going to events locally, maybe you live way off in, bumscrew nowhere, and like there's not even a game store for like an hour drive where even 15 people would go to see your game, which that's probably still worth it. But if you can't even do that, we have the power of the internet. You can stream your content. It's not just getting Let's Players to stream your game, but, getting you and your friends together and like getting a small group of people to just, show off a game stream that you're doing, show off your development. Because those online communities are important. I mean, we're seeing one right now. There's a community actually, talking about this chat right here, and this is going to be really good feedback for this talk or just the concept of games in general. But being involved with those communities is super motivational. You have someone else to relate to. You have someone playing your work, and you have reasons to make it better. But really, like, the most important thing about going to events and showing off your game is this is why you are actually making games. Like, it is incredibly rare. It is the exception for someone to be making a game for themselves and to never show it ever and never have any goals to showing it. Generally, when people make games, they're using it to express ideas or concepts or, some message or some question, and they want other people to experience it. Going to an event is a way to basically like sort of cheat the system and have that happen before your game is ready for release. You get to see people actually playing your game, and that's the most amazing experience. That's really why we make games. And yeah, so those are a bunch of reasons as to why you should be showing your game early and often. So I want to just thank you all for listening to that, but we're going to move straight into dealing with a couple of questions that are coming up in the chat, and we'll do some talk. So, fortunately, Andrew over here has been taking notes, and he's got some things that he wants to address right now.
Yeah, so there's actually only a couple things I had to write down, but Brilliance pointed out I talk that we can't please everyone, and that shouldn't really be a goal. And while I agree with you there, I think the point isn't to please everyone. The point is to please your game pillars. So the kind of core tenets of your game are what you should be making the feedback you're looking for. You always wanted channel surfers to be about screwing your friends over. That's what the game is supposed to encourage, and that's like the feedback loop that we want is, yeah, I just like took something from that guy and made fun of him and laughed in his face, and that's great, and I feel good now. And what we worked on for a year didn't allow that, and it was confusing for a number of reasons. So we don't really go and show it to people looking for, hey, do you like my game? Oh, they didn't like my game. I have to change it so he likes my game. It's more, did I see the response in them that I was expecting? Is he doing the things that the game is supposed to encourage him to do? Like, is he trying to take back paint territory from me, running into a wall? So while, yeah, we're not trying to please everybody, and that shouldn't be a goal, that's not really what we're looking for. You've only shown your game to like a handful of people in a handful of places, and most of them didn't get it. It doesn't matter that you're not pleasing everybody. You're barely pleasing anybody. So kind of going after those first kind of few groups of people is how we like make sure that we're on the right track. So that's kind of the changes that we've made. Oh yeah, the other thing is I think that is important for us is realizing that it's okay to admit you were wrong. Like we tried a bunch of things, we tried them for a very long time. And if we continue holding on to that in the face of all these people like apathetically looking at our game and kind of shrugging, then like you won't get anywhere. That's not a good feeling. So being willing to just say, okay, what did we do wrong? Where did we screw up? Be very analytical about that is what's helped us a lot. And like, yeah, this didn't work. We'll try something else and maybe it'll work. And if it doesn't work, we'll try something else after that. So that's kind of the biggest takeaways that I look for when I'm showing the game off to people is I just want to make sure that they're playing it the way that design the game around. And if they're not, then maybe we design the game wrong. That should be like, it's a pillar of the game. It should be, oh, I picked up a controller. How can I screw somebody over? That's what we immediately want people to try to do. Doing that, then we screw. So I think the other question that I wrote down was more for you. Best friend Skull said that he's anxious about bothering people when he tries to do marketing, and was curious as to how you kind of get around that anxious feeling and make sure that you're not like irritating people to the point where they won't play your game just to spite you.
Yeah, I'll start off this, but I'm curious about everyone's opinion on this. Yeah, that's actually really brutal. One of the events I show my game at is actually a networking event, and so people are going there to meet each other, to mingle. You can show off your games there, and it is encouraged, but it's really odd to just jump into a group of people and like stop them. But the thing is, I mean, you got to have a little faith in what you're doing. Like, sure, you might be bothering someone, and be like getting in and interrupting them, but what are you offering them? You're offering them to have a great experience playing a game. It does require a little bit of confidence in your game and having faith that they will have a good time, but really, like, you're not selling them something there. You're just asking for a little bit of their time. The worst thing that they're going to say is like, no, not right now, and then you just remind them like, hey, we'll be here all night. Why don't you check it out later? In fact, I have an anecdote about this. I was at the Ray Gun Lounge. It's a really great place here in Seattle. Gosu holds events there once a month. And there's going to be a huge event in August. So if you're in the Seattle area, you should check that out. Also, there are links right now about events happening not only in Seattle, but in other areas too. You should totally be checking all those events out in the chat right now. But yeah, so we were showing off the game at the Ray Gun Lounge, and I saw a group of 4 people just chilling at the bar having a conversation. That's exactly how many players I need in my game, so I went up and approached them. I talked with them a little bit, and then eventually asked them to play the game. And they totally called me out on it. They're like, oh, of course you were just joining our conversation, so you could get us to play our game. And they're not exactly wrong, but I ended up talking with the guys a little bit. They're really cool, and I'm glad I met them. And not all of them came over to play, but at one point one of them did, and later in the night the other one did, or another one of the four did, and they had a great time. They started talking about the game. They asked for cards. They started telling other groups of people to play the game, and so it was actually a really big deal to sort of bother them, because they're not like whatever. Like some person asks you to play a game. If you don't want to play a game, you just say no. Don't be abusive about it. Don't be like hounding all these people, but just ask them. And you sort of owe it to ask every person in the area to play your game. One, because you should be like, don't judge people when you're showing off your game. Like everyone might be able to like your game, so ask every single person. In addition, the thing that you're providing them is not like bad. Maybe if your game deals with really harsh, intense topics, you might be a little more cautious about showing off your game. But let people know what your game's about and see if they're interested. It really depends on what your game is. I'm curious if Charles, you have anything to add into that, or possibly Andrew.
Well, I think definitely the meetups you mentioned earlier about the meetups are super important in going out and getting people to get that feedback. And I found actually that at least the events I've been to, the indie community here in Seattle is super supportive. And so I find that you get good quality feedback. People are honest about your games, but they're still supportive, which is good. And they're not super, they're not Pollyannas, right? If something's wrong, they'll tell you. And so, that's good, right? But they'll tell you with the intent of, oh, you can go fix this. Something else I think you mentioned earlier, I'm not sure who mentioned this, just in terms of finding the right players, I actually found that exactly to be the case as well, because I got feedback on my game that there were a certain class of players that want the game to be more strategic, and there's a certain class of players that want the game to be more arcade-like. And both of those would be great games, but I can only make one of them. And so I think the game is now evolving more towards the arcade style of gaming, at least the action, the core loop is, which is good. It's giving me focus in terms of what sort of features. And then you'll get players who don't want to play your game. There was a great talk by Sid Meier about 2 GDCs ago about the types of people who play your games and give you feedback. And I encourage you to go find that talk if you can go find it on the GDC Vault. But one of the things that was clear from that is there are people who are giving you feedback because they want to play a different game, right? And so you need to identify those people and say, okay, you don't want to play this game. That's okay. But you over here, you want to play my game, and you're telling me something that's preventing you from playing it. Okay, that's good feedback for me to start applying. And so getting out there in front of people is a really a good way to get that feedback.
Anything you want to add on that, Andrew, or there's a couple other questions in there?
Something that I still kind of work on. Hey, let me waste your time for a few minutes. But I mean, it is something that's very important, and I've last meetup at Raygun. So at the last meetup, I did go show it to more people. Like I did better. That was a kind of personal goal I had. It was like, I want more people to play this game last time. So that's kind of how I measure how I'm doing. And I think that it's something that I'm improving on. So you just kind of have to be aware of what's going on and what you're doing, point to improve.
Yeah. Cool. I want to move on to a couple other questions here. One, I'm actually not super certain how to answer this, but there's been a talking about doing marketing based off of what is it, like sort of like negative stuff? Let me find it. Getting bad attention. Let me find the actual question. So is it worthwhile to generate negative attention towards your game under assumption that bad attention is still attention? Maybe that's more of a culture question, I guess. My sort of take on it is that 2DX is a very honest company. So in that if people are saying, things that they don't like about our game, things that they want, to see in our game, we're going to address that. We're either going to, accept that and, feel like that we should change our game and actually work on that aspect because we think it's important, or there's something that we just don't want to put in, and we'll have reasons to it, but we need to explain that. So as far as generating like sort of bad, like controversial marketing, that's not something that we would necessarily be interested in doing. I guess it depends on the project itself. If you're making a game that deals with harsh, controversial topics and you want people to start a discussion about it, maybe that is a way to go. But I mean, you got to be careful with that. You can end up like, you know, offending a lot of people. But if your goal is to actually just bring light to something, I mean, like now we're getting to it basically like, you know, don't be a douchebag. Like, don't make a game that exploits people, because yes, you'll be a jerk. But if you make a game that actually deals with topics that are questionable, then, you know, you have to understand that there's going to be very different opinions looking into your game, and that is going to generate buzz. So as long as you're clear about what it is your game is doing, then it can help you, you know, avoid a lot of flack, and hopefully have people understand that, you know, either you're not taking a side on the situation or you're just expressing the sides, you know, because games are a medium which you can interact with, and there's different ways to take a look at it. And that if people understand that, that should help you out a lot. But I guess my final call is that, like, I would not try to look like a bad person, but I would definitely encourage bringing up conversations for marketing. Charles, you got anything to say on that one? No, absolutely not. Anything
sorry, the mumble client was getting in my way there.
Okay.
You know, I think in terms of marketing, you know, I'm going for kind of a nostalgic, kind of happy experience. Like, I'm actually going for a very stylized, over the top, like, you know, like one of my touchstones is like Top Gun and like 80s hair music and hair band music, and so like really just kind of really go heroism. And so from that point of view, I mean, my game isn't really trying to get that kind of image there. I think I would also, just as a side note, you know, we're all part of the indie scene. We see what goes on there. You have to really be careful, because people can get very, very quickly taken out of context. It's very easy. Like, you know, recently, this just happened a couple days ago. One of the animators at Ubisoft made some comment which was a bit careless, and it just exploded in his face. And so, you know, it's really easy to generate negative buzz, and I would be leery of that.
It's on push to talk, which is why it's not reading you at all. Yeah, so here, you can just take this. Andrew's going to say a couple things for you. Here.
Almost forgot what I was going to say. I can just figure out which button it is to push and just push the button.
Yeah, there's no keyboard attached to that.
Damn it.
All right, let's go.
But yeah, I was going to reiterate that it is important. I mean, I've seen coworkers lose their jobs over just random things they say, and I don't think anyone thought that they were necessarily wrong. It was just an opinion, but it's important to realize what your opinion. A lot of people argue like, "Oh, First Amendment rights, like I'm free," but like you're free to say it. You're not free from punishment. So just be conscious of how you're expressing yourself and how what your game is showing might make other people feel. And I think a lot of my points come back to being adaptive and being willing to say like, okay, well, this is what I was hoping they would think. This is what they actually thought. How do I adjust with this new thing? And maybe you don't change your game entirely, maybe you don't change it at all, but just be aware of the fact that you had this effect on somebody, and maybe that's not the effect that you wanted. So again, just like taking note of that and realize what you're doing, what it's doing to other people. Very important skill. What I got?
Just to sort of wrap that last one up, this is also a really great reason why you should show stuff off early. You might end up, like, if you do end up creating something that inadvertently offends someone or generates an idea that you don't want your game to convey, then showing it off to a small group of people is going to be much easier to manage than showing it off to the entire internet. So being able to see that sort of reflection on, of course, you know, when you do release the game to the whole world, there's a lot more people will have a lot more interpretations that you didn't think of. You know, we saw this with Vlambeer's Luftrausers. And I think they dealt with it very well. They knew exactly what they were doing because they had a very clear idea of what their game was, and so they didn't compromise that when talking about it, but they were incredibly apologetic for basically doing something they didn't realize what they were doing. So I don't know, I appreciated that. We've had some interesting talk in the chat, just basically talking about critique in general. So we'll take a little bit of time to talk about that because we still have some more time.
Yeah, 4 minutes.
Yeah, so we'll wrap up by talking about this concept of critique and dealing with it. So I guess I'll get us started off here, and that basically, like, there's lots of different ways to take critique, and everyone's going to come in with their own opinions, their own feelings, right? Like, if I critique your game, I'm probably going to encourage you to make more of an action style game, right? Just because that's the type of games I like. I like games that feel fast. I like games that feel tight. You know, if I'm playing your game and it's a puzzle game or a tactics RPG, I might not be the best person to give you feedback. And so it's your job as a developer to understand that. You need to know sort of what the player is expecting to get out of the game, and you can tell it in basically, there's a few ways you can discern that. Like, first of all, like, just see how they approach the game. You know, if they're already not into it when they hold the controller, if they hate your game, maybe that's not a big deal because they weren't really, like, they already decided they didn't like your game. Now, if they come in really excited about it and then something happens and their entire expression changes and they walk away upset, like, that's something to pay attention to. If you have someone who, like, doesn't, like, they're saying, like, they don't want to play the game, but you hand them the controller and they take it, and then all of a sudden they light up and they're really into it, like, okay, that's something you should pay attention to. Like, why did they have that transition? But another thing is sort of something I touched on earlier, which is just focus on the sort of feedback you're looking for. You know, if you're going through the game and you're testing out brand new levels with some rough assets and everyone's talking about how horrible the assets look, then if they're not mentioning anything else, such as, like, you know, the way the levels flow or like the actual pacing of the game, then you probably actually succeeded. You just haven't finished working yet. And now you know the next thing you need to work on. This is the thing that we encountered in sports ball. Players on the same team share the same color, and players have been having a lot of trouble discerning themselves from their teammates on it. And that's because basically I made the assets very quickly to get the game playable, and they didn't have strong silhouettes. They weren't blocked out properly, and so this has been a huge issue. And there were more important issues to deal with. But what was interesting is that as we solved the other problems that people were critiquing us on, this was the only one that remained, which means that, like, these, obviously, like, the game is still improving and that we're getting less and less of, like, other issues. Like, people aren't bringing those up anymore, so our work is progressing. But now we're realizing that this is becoming more and more of an important thing, and it's, like, the next thing we need to deal with. And as far as, like, you know, just taking critique in general, like, don't take it too personally. You know, people are just telling their opinions. You know, it's okay if someone doesn't like your game, just as okay as it is if someone loves your game. Like, just because one person doesn't like it doesn't mean you have to throw away the entire concept or, you know, be upset. Like, people have opinions. Like, just when you're talking about your friends and you like a movie and they don't like a movie, or you're into this band and they hate it, right? Like, it's all going to be based off opinions. Your game is no different. So don't get distraught. Instead, look for what it is that they're saying. Try to understand why they don't like it, and you need to decide if that's important for your game. Like, if you were trying to sell your game to them, like, you want them to play it, and there's something that they don't get, they don't understand, then you need to understand, like, why it is that they are having trouble with that aspect. If they're not the type of person that will enjoy your game, then you can probably throw that critique away. You know, still appreciate it. But yeah, Andrew or Charles, do you want to mention your take on, you know, taking critique?
Yeah, I would just want to emphasize that you have to really look at what is it that the player is trying to get out of your game, right? And there's some players who are saying, this is the thing that's preventing me from enjoying your game, right? And that's a good set of feedback. Then there's players that are very much saying, you know, I'm not the kind of player you want, and if you wanted me to play your game, this is what you'd have to do. And so you have to make choices about that. I think also, even with players that they're your kind of player, right? You always want to be gracious with feedback, but also you always have the option of deciding which parts of the feedback you want to honor and which ones you don't. It's not all or nothing. You don't want to say, oh, this person said X, Y, and Z, and so I will do everything X, Y, and Z. It's more like, well, I've received 3 pieces of feedback X, Y, and Z, and independently, I can determine what I want to do with those. And and see how they comport to the vision. I think also having vision's a tricky thing, right? Because vision sustains you when you're lost in the woods, but sometimes it prevents you from hearing some feedback that you get in. But I think having a good vision is also important to applying the feedback, right? Because you compare it to your vision and you say, is that really the experience I'm trying to deliver to players? And then it makes it a lot easier to get all sorts of feedback, because then you can say very simply, oh, that feedback actually isn't what I'm trying to accomplish, right? And so it's just the act of being. You don't want to be a knee jerk. You don't want to knee jerk reaction to every piece of feedback, but at the same time you don't want to be a brick wall. But just being active about interpreting feedback, I think, is really super important. I know I've had that, right, where I've had people play my game and it's pretty clear they don't want to play this game, which is okay. There's tons of games out there. They'll find the game they want. But then I accept the feedback and then just move on to the next opportunity.
Cool. Andrew, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I agree with what everyone's already said, basically. But I think that it's important to be able to distill your game into like the smallest chunk, so that when you get feedback, you can kind of take it and say, like, okay, well, this player didn't like the movement. Why didn't they like the movement? Was movement really important? Do I care that they didn't like it? I mean, if you're making a racing game, then yeah, it's probably pretty important that they didn't like the way the game controlled. But if you're making like a racing game and they don't like the camera, maybe that's less important. As an example, that's probably someone will refute or whatever. But like in our experience, we didn't have that initially, and so it was hard to take feedback and be like, okay, well, they didn't get the scoring, but maybe that's their fault. Maybe we'll just add a tutorial. And like at some level, you have to be willing to say, like, okay, well, the game is this. The game is about scoring and movement and screwing people over. And yeah, and so when feedback comes in, it's, well, I got this feedback about the scoring and this feedback about the movement, and kind of all of these are important, and you have to take all of that and mesh it up and be like, okay, do we scrap this? Like, where do we go from here? And so that's one of the things that we've really focused on with like the second version of our game after coming out of a year of development going, what were we trying to make? How did we veer away from that? And what has the feedback told us about how we can stick closer to that goal? So we're just very, very critical about kind of ourselves all the time and always looking back at like, what are we doing? And I think that it's important to realize that feedback can come from everywhere. Like, you don't have to go find other players to play your game to get some feedback. You've got a team. Like, there's at least one person working on your game who can be critical about the game. We're talking with one of our artists, and he was just like, yeah, I mean, I don't really care about this game, but like, it's your game design, so whatever. And like, yeah, you can be okay with that. And you can be like, okay, well, we're not making a game for him. That's fine. But at the same point, you're like you're making this thing, and your passion's goes into it. So you can take feedback from the people on the team. Like, okay, well, what does he not like? He doesn't like the movement, or he doesn't like the combat of the game in general. How do we fix that? And I think that was something important to realize, is that like you can poke each other too. I have to add.
All right, so yeah, we've talked about a bunch of things. I hope you are convinced that you should be showing your game like right now, maybe tomorrow. Who knows? You should do that. But we're gonna wrap this up. There's still conversation going on in the chat. Some awesome stuff about talking about sound design and how important that is in the games. And there's a bunch of free time now, so keep that chat going. Just keep that conversation going. I also want to remind everyone that further up in the chat there was a bunch of links to events in all sorts of areas. I'm going to get on some of that stuff. But furthermore, if you're interested in holding events, if you're interested in finding events in your area, whether they're in the Seattle area or not, contact us. Our contact info is up there. You can reach me at PIIDX or at 2DX. You can be Andrew at Gleeson, which is a great Twitter handle. I don't think you even realize that. It's clever. And Charles doesn't have a Twitter, but he's got an awesome website, and you can contact him through that. But yeah, just like reach out to us if you've got questions or concerns about showing off your game. If you don't know how to get started, you don't know about events in your area, or you want to work with us and hold an event. We are trying to make bigger and better events constantly. So I'm totally going to be working with some of these people that posted some events up here to make some great stuff. But yeah, get your game out, get it dirty. Get some feedback, make your game actually good. Communicate with people who really want to play your games. Yeah, thanks for showing, and we'll end it up here. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.